Thank you to the presenters. Those were wonderful. We do still have some questions that I'd like to share with the audience. Um, First of all, from Dean Hoffman, this is primarily for Kelly. What are the health results of the sheep and vineyard pasture system in terms of outcomes for weight, parasite load, and wool production?
So we actually use hair sheep, so we've never really had too much issue with parasite loads, but we do check them pretty often to make sure that the parasite loads are good, are not high. And as far as pasture, we do check that regularly. We do a number of different tests. We're often looking at just nutrient availability, nutrient levels in our pasture. And one of the things that is pretty common is that the vineyard has the highest relative feed value of any place on the ranch. We do graze, so everything on the ranch, all of our cropping practices, we integrate livestock on those. So that includes grains. We have some perennial pasture that we're starting. So obviously that is specifically for feed. But and then we're looking at developing some silvopasture systems as well. We have not done any grazing of vegetable crops, and then the reason we haven't done that is because of food safety issues. And so that would be just a little bit dangerous to go into that realm at this point. I have grazed, I grew about 60 different types of vegetables when I was in Colorado. And we did graze those areas, and we were able to do that by, it was actually a rotation. So we would graze the year before planting those vegetables, and that was at 7,600 feet in elevation. We had really intense freezing and a very short season. So in effect, the probably any pathogens that might have existed in that were killed during the winter season. But otherwise, we're always monitoring our feed value and the forage quality of all of the places that we graze. And I think part of the reason that the vineyard is so high is because we have both a perennial browse in there, as well as a diversity of native and non-native forage species.
Thank you, Kelly. I have a question for Johnny and for Carrie, and that is, what is the limit of a herd size, either beef cattle or horses, for using rotational grazing?
Very different answers between the two of us. Johnny, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can, and it might surprise you. I've seen some folks really do some pretty neat things with as few as 2 cows. I mean, you can, it is very intense, to get the stock density where you want it. And then water and shade location becomes more of a challenge, especially, well, even where you guys are. It gets hot everywhere in the summertime, and we have to worry about that. But I wouldn't, I sure wouldn't let it limit you. But again, what we try to promote is do what you can do. I think there's too many people out here in our grazing culture that say that if you can't move cattle every day, don't even start. And I just don't think that's right. I think if you can move cattle once a week, that's a heck of a lot better than not moving them at all. And I think that goes across species. And I have just, I'll turn it over to you, Carrie, but I have worked with Dr. Paul Siciliano down here at State on some horse equine grazing projects. And I'm not a horse person, but I am very, very impressed and excited about what we can do about managed grazing for horses, And I think the horses get a bad rap sometime about some overgrazed situations. And I will say this, there's a lot of overgrazed cow pastures out there too. So the animal's not the problem, it's the management. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, I haven't worked with cattle at all, so I'm surprised you said that, you know, it can be done at such a low stocking density, because usually what you see is it's super intense, lots of animals moved very rapidly, and that's exactly opposite of what's done with the horses. You know, usually you find, and we had about 3 to 4 horses on our 4-acre pastures, so it was close to 1-to-1. Granted, in the spring season, we felt like we could have had probably double that and been able to much better manage the excess grass that we had, because we did have to do a lot of mowing to keep the grass, you know, from getting too, you know, from growing to seed and getting too tall and lodging over. But yeah, there are times in the summer, like I was saying, with some of our summer slump periods and in the drought where, you know, even 3 horses on 4 acres, we still were running out of grass and needed to put them in stress lots. So I think it's not a simple answer for, you know, exactly how many you need. It really all depends. And if you're in a system, unlike ours, well, we had to keep the same horses on the same fields for that period of time. But if you can have the availability to move and change your density as you go through the seasons, I think it's ideal, because definitely in the fast growing spring, you can put a lot more animals on, you know, smaller acreage than you can in the summer. And then change it back to something else in the fall. But yeah, typically most of our systems were, you know, 0.4 to 0.5 acres in size. And, you know, we typically ran the horses through every 5 to even 10 days, like I said, during some of the quick spring growing season. So I know it's not a really hard and fast answer, but it does depend on a lot.
Thank you. I have another question, really a comment from Dean Hoffman. And he said, Biden's Climate 21 project proposes carbon banking as a sustainable and economically viable goal for farmers. And then he says, the Brubaker farm looks well positioned. One of the things that you saw in the video was the cover crops, the rye cover crops that they use. Their land is without cover crops for a very, very short time during the year. So he's very sensitive to, you know, the threat of soil erosion. And he tries to, you know, cover the land as much as possible. He also uses no-till. He doesn't, you know, plow up the soil. And he tries to build up the soil, of course, with using his own manure there through the digester. So something I think a lot of us are waiting for is the opportunity for farmers to be able to sell carbon offset credits. They can already do this through a voluntary market, and actually California has started doing this with agricultural land through their cap and trade program as well. But that would be a wonderful source of revenue for farms if they could sell carbon offset credits. So
I mean, I think the idea is to expand the rural development program, which is currently about $33 billion through the USDA, and expand that program and work with the USDA as well as the Department of Energy. But you know, it's very early, right? So, but it's interesting that it's out there in, you know, their climate plan.
yeah, the climate legislation that passed the House of Representatives in 2010 actually did have a component for farm as well as forest carbon offset credits. So it's not a new idea. We just need to do it, I guess. So Zach, I'm going to turn it to you, and or Ellen, if you have any questions.
Is Lamont still on the line? He had some questions for Kelly with just some, I guess, a bit different of an approach than what, but I would love if he could come on.
Yes, Lamont raised a question that he does a lot of stream bank fencing, of course, and so he's planting a lot of tree seedlings, and they've had some problems with the sheep eating the tree seedlings. And he wondered if Kelly had any advice on what they could do.
So we actually did an experiment this summer because we had a section that was where the vines were primarily up high enough so that we could graze it, but there's a few very small vines, including they were mainly rootstock, so stuff that needed to be grafted next year. And if we'd put the sheep in there without protecting those somehow, they would have eaten those first thing. What we found out is that if we put a tall grow tube on those, that, and by tall we're using a grow tube that was about 4.5, 5 feet tall, that was effective as long as we didn't have a guard dog in there. If we had a guard dog in there, the guard dogs would chew those tubes up. They'd rip them off the plants and chew them up, and then the sheep would be able to go in there. So it did take a little bit of figuring out some things, like in order to protect vines, we actually had to have the guard dogs out of there. But so I would recommend in a situation like that they try a large or tall grow tube and see if that works. I've also seen that they seem to be doing a lot more agroforestry and silvopasture in Europe. And I've seen a lot of interesting protectors that they sell in Europe anyway. And it seems like it would be possible for us to get some of those on this side of the ocean as well. So that's another source. But I've found that the tall grow tubes are pretty effective as long as they're on a good stout stake.
Yeah, thanks. That's what we use. So maybe I just need a stouter steak.
I can ask a question, and actually this would probably be for certainly for Carrie, because you mentioned it in your talk, but potentially as well for Johnny. One of the things you said that you were actually doing, Carrie, you were doing some research on the use of warm season grasses in your pastures, and I was just curious as to is there a lot of like restrictions on why that hasn't been researched or done before, and why the focus has really been on cool season grasses versus warm season, given that those are a lot more of our native traditional rangeland?
I know particularly for our area, there's a lot of thoughts, and actually this was my impression before we started a lot of this, is that they don't grow at all or very well in New Jersey. We're central to north central New Jersey, so we're kind of in that transition zone. We do have one of our agronomists on my current graduate students PhD committee, and he's the one who suggested starting to look at things like some of the cold tolerant Bermuda grasses, which he's been showing have been taking off and doing very well on golf courses. So we've tried that with limited success. We didn't sprig them in, we seeded, and we had a fairly decent stand the first year, but a terrible stand the second year, and it was really a very weather dependent. But what we've had great success with and am thrilled about is some of the forage varieties of crabgrass. We're using particularly the quick and big variety of crabgrass. Super quick growing, really easy to establish, and the horses love it. Granted, we were also finding, and this is what, right before COVID hit, my graduate student was going to start a really big study looking at rotational grazing with some interseeding and some monoculture sections of the quick and big crabgrass on horse production as well. Because while we saw in my study that in the continuous grazing system, particularly the horses gained weight, crabgrass is very low in the non-structural carbohydrates, especially some of these carbohydrates that a lot of the really metabolically efficient horses are not so good at grazing because they get obese or insulin resistant, laminic, things like that. So we had a very big study that was going to start with that when basically the university shut down and we weren't able to start back up in time to get the grazing done. But yeah, I think that the quick and big crabgrass has a lot of potential, and I know it's been used a lot in horses, and Johnny might be able to, or in cattle, sorry, but Johnny might be able to comment on that. I think it has a lot of potential in horses too.
Yeah, I think Carrie covered it pretty good. I'll just add a few things. Crabgrass is probably the most prevalent warm season addition to, if you think about North Carolina, we're the western 2/3 of our state, kind of west of Raleigh. That is fescue dominated, cool season grass dominated. East of Raleigh, east of 95 would be the coastal plain, which would be Bermuda grass. So I'll talk about kind of the cool season part where I am, and we have added some Bermuda grass to our system, and we did a lot of research on our farm about native warm season grasses, and we already had crabgrass. Crabgrass, we like a crabgrass ryegrass rotation. Crabgrass in the summer, ryegrass in the winter. They're both annuals, but they are very prolific reseeders. They naturally produce a lot of seed, and man, they just so it's really kind of a lazy farmer's way of kind of managing that system. So crabgrass is a very important component on a lot of farms, not just ours. Native warm season grasses, I will speak to that just a little bit as far as perennials go. Now, we have a lot of folks using annual forages, and the video clip you saw with some of our cattle going into a diverse mix of summer annuals, sorghum, sudan grass, millets, and other things. But the native warm seasons, the big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, a resource for those is Pat Kaiser there at the University of Tennessee. Is probably one of the world leaders as far as establishing those in the East Coast. And I see those as not working as well for some farmers. I actually know some very good grazers who have tried native warm season grasses and they didn't like it. They have went to Bermuda grass. I also know some, Mike and Gene Jones, I featured in one of my slides. They use a lot of native warm season grasses and they like it. Here's the difference that I see. The farmer that went more toward Bermuda grass, he's interested in optimizing or maximizing stocking rates and productivity. And he also likes a forage that you don't have to baby that much, as far as grazing height and whatnot, which you do with the natives. Mike and Gene Jones, they are grazing ecologists, I'll call them. More than farmers, I think. They are interested in wildlife. They go crazy over dung beetles, which is great. All these things are great. And they're not as worried about having the maximum number of beef produced per acre. So natives work very good there for them. And I think natives have a place in a grazing system. But again, there's, nothing's perfect. So
I'm
hopefully
gonna
that gets
add just one thing. Can I do that, Zach? Am I allowed? I mean, I know I'm like Mars now, but I used to be a grazing scientist in a former life. My last PhD student, who actually we were just putting together some manuscripts, was looking at the use of some of the native warm seasons in a grazing system for horses, which was, I think, when I was at UT, I did some of this, exploring this with Pat Kaiser, but we looked at Indian grass and big blue stem. And one of our concerns is that switchgrass is toxic to horses, right? So we wanted to make sure there was no toxicity issues before we started recommending these. So we did find, it hasn't been published yet, but in the safety of our Educational Innovation Center here, we didn't have any hepatic concerns in these horses that were grazing Indian and big blue stem. Managing them and the way that they grow, we had a very short duration, but we did find some really great benefits from a biodiversity standpoint. We had some other areas of native warm seasons with looking at pollinators and some of those types of issues. So I think it's definitely an area that I would like to see more research done to see how it kind of goes into a whole grazing system or even farm management system. Maybe it's better as a hay than for grazing, for example. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there that some of that work's being started and would like to see more of it done. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have a question from Ellen Nisis, who is the head of PennPraxis and also one of the team working on the Farm of the Future. And she is asking all you grazing experts, are there animal health questions related to grazing that you'd like to see vet school farms take on?
I can chime in here a little bit. I know, you know, I would love to have someone continue some of the work that my PhD student has actually been doing, because things have been cut a little short. She's also focused a lot on the microbiome and health of the microbiome in these grazing horses, because I think so much, I mean, a lot has been done on that, but it really hasn't been focused on the grazing aspects. You know, she has a little bit and been finding some really interesting stuff, but again, her time is coming to an end, and you know, with COVID cutting us all short, we weren't able to really expand on that. And I know there's some other labs that have been doing some of that as well, but I think it's such a huge area that, you know, is critical. And I almost feel like sometimes the horse research is a little bit behind other species as well. And it's so vastly different. You can't have interspecies. You can't extrapolate from a lot of other species, because you know, in the horse world, the microbiome is so different. So I would think that would be one area that would be really interesting to continue working on.
Yeah, I would say on this, I'll comment on small ruminants first, sheep and goats. I would think probably, you know, parasites and feet are probably, and foot health, you know, are probably the two biggest challenges, along with predation. You know, predation, we can handle that with guardian animals and other methods, but probably, you know, I still think in the East we're challenged, and I know, you know, some folks that are in the sheep and goat world that think that sheep shouldn't even eat grass, especially young lambs. You know, they shouldn't even eat grass because of the parasite burden. And I understand why they say that, but you know, so I think that's probably something to look at on the small ruminant side. Probably same would go for goats. Probably even be magnified even more with goats. If you turn a goat into a grazer, you've got a train wreck getting ready to happen. Seems like sometimes they're better browsers. On the cattle side, you know, I don't know. One of the things that the microbiome that Carrie mentioned, I think, is there's a lot of that work going on in cattle as well. And fetal programming is another one that comes along, but nobody really wants to touch the fetal programming deal because it's such a long study. And that's kind of where, you know, you're looking at the neonatal, you know, gestational nutrition of cows. And what impact does that have on their calves, you know, the lifetime productivity of their calves. And there's been some really cool research coming out of Florida and some other universities. So to me, that's really interesting, because some of that mid-gestation way of thinking was we could just kind of abuse a cow during that time period. And now we're kind of looking on the human health side and saying, no, you know, pregnant women, you know, they need to have a good source of nutrients and carefully monitored nutrition during gestation. So some of that's coming over to the animal side now. And again, I don't know if y'all could get to that or not, but that is pretty interesting. So.
Can I actually answer one of the questions verbally? Because I want to pull in maybe Bridget and Johnny to help as well. There was one from Jim about determining rotation during the winter season, especially in the mid-Atlantic states versus spring and summer. And I know I haven't really done much outside of the state of New Jersey, which, you know, once it hits, I mean, we're actually really warm right here in New Jersey now, so we're still grazing. But once December comes, it'll be until April, May before we get them back on pasture again. So we don't rotate in the winter, but we pretty much always just use that take half, leave half rule. If there's not going to be more than 3 inches of grass, they come off the grass. So I don't know if Bridget, I know you did a lot of grazing in Virginia, and what your seasons were, or I'm sure, you know, North Carolina's really different as well.
Yeah, just quickly, I did that grazing, rotational grazing for 2 or 3 years, and it just depended on the winter. One winter was really hard and another one wasn't. So I think it really just depended on the growing conditions. And we mostly had a tall fescue, which is going to be a lot more cold hardy, and we'd stockpiled some of the plots because we didn't have to rotate as much. I've just found that it kind of depends on the season and the stocking rate, but Johnny probably has a lot better answer than that.
Yeah, you know, North Carolina would be a lot different, obviously, just weather-wise than you guys would be. But one thing that we do that's a little weird is we're feeding cattle some hay now and letting our grasses actually stockpile. And there's a couple reasons we do that. Actually, our stockpile forage will be much better than our hay. And we fall calves. So when we're breeding our cows, we want the best nutrition going into them. So we're stockpiling grass now. We'll start, you know, grazing in earnest in December. But we do give the cows some fresh grass. So we do have, we're kind of moving them, you know, to fresh grass about every 2 days. And we're giving them hay on the days that they don't get fresh grass. And we actually unroll our hay in a dispersed method, kind of like I showed you there. And what that fall hay feeding does is that it allows you to grow the grass in the fall that you normally would not grow. And that's a hard concept as an educator, you know, to get that across to somebody, because they never miss that grass because they never grow it. But when you kind of help, you know, and what we've done is we've, you know, excluded some of the paddocks or used temporary fence to exclude some of the area and let it stockpile. And then you can graze that. It's better nutritionally. It's probably, you know, it's a rested plant. So you've done a good thing for the plant there. You fed the soil microbiology, and you can graze that stockpile forage even through snow. I mean, a cow will graze up to her eyeballs in snow if there's something worth getting under the snow. So it's, you know, there's, and sheep will kind of paw around at probably snow, not quite that deep, but, you know, if you got multiple species, it could work. But what we try to do in the wintertime is we're more intense during the wintertime because our alternative to feeding hay, our alternative is feeding hay, which is expensive. During the summertime, I may move cattle twice a week. I may move them once a day. I may move them once a month, you know, just depending on what's going on. And that has changed as I have went from a 30-something farmer to a 50-something-year-old farmer. It's, you kind of have to, again, adapt to the situation. And also, again, like I say, there's times we move them quite frequently, but I don't think you have to do that every day of the year. I have yet to see the grazing police show up and arrest anybody for not moving their animals on a timely fashion. So have you ever seen that, Bridget? Has the grazing police ever showed up? So it's pretty flexible. Do what works for you.
I'd like to thank all the presenters today for making this a very informative and innovative session for the Farm of the Future. And now I'd like to turn it over to Margaret Liardi, who is the Director of Development at the Penn Vet School. Margaret?
Thank you, Tom. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our presenters and also to our donors who helped make this symposium possible. We can't do this without you, and we can't especially do it without all participants and presenters. So thank you, everyone. And I'd like to also then turn it over to our Dean, Andrew Hoffman.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone. That was a terrific session. I want to thank Carrie Mulville from Patsines Ranch, Mike Brubaker from Brubaker Farms, Bridget McIntosh from Mars, Carrie Williams from Rutgers, of course, and Johnny Rogers from the Rogers Cattle Company, Amazing Grace, and North Carolina State University. You really made us think. We've really got a lot to take home with this session, and it really is starting to come together with several of the other sessions that we've had with respect to grazing technology and with respect to restoring agriculture and ecosystems in a way that's integrated. So thank you so much. I would urge everybody to go back and look at the videos and if they've missed any, and we will continue next week for our final session. We'll have some great student participation as well as our speakers. So thanks again to the speakers, thanks to the attendees and the sponsors, and I wish you a great rest of your week.